You never expect your own child to make you feel like a guest in their life. But heartbreak doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives softly, over the phone, wrapped in polite words that cut deeper than knives. It was Christmas Eve. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasted apples. The candles flickered on the dining table I'd polished till it shone like memory itself. 6 plates, 6 napkins, 1 mother waiting. The phone rang. I smiled instantly. I'd know her ringtone anywhere. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you on your way?" A pause. Then laughter, not hers alone, but others in the background. A clinking of glasses, the sound of celebration. "Mom?" she said, her tone gentle but distant. "We didn't have room at the table this year. There's just too many of us. Maybe next time, okay?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words didn't even sound real. No room for me. I managed to whisper, "Of course, darling. Have a lovely dinner." My voice cracked at lovely. When the call ended, I just stood there, staring at the empty table. The candles kept burning, the food sat untouched. And in that quiet house, it hit me. Love doesn't always leave with noise. Sometimes it just forgets to invite you. I sat down slowly, tracing the edge of the plate where her seat used to be, and whispered to no one, "I used to feed you here." Outside, the snow began to fall, soft, endless, indifferent. And as I watched it through the window, I realized there was only one thing colder than winter: being unwanted by the person you loved most.
Hi, my name is Eleanor Blake. I live alone in a small farmhouse on the edge of Vermont. It's an old house, the kind that creaks when the wind blows and smells faintly of coffee, old books, and wood smoke. For most of my life, this place was filled with noise, laughter, footsteps, the hum of love. Now it's just me and the clock ticking in the kitchen. But I still wake up early, still set 2 plates out of habit, and still talk to the silence as if it remembers me. Before I go on, I want to ask something of you. If you've ever felt forgotten by someone you gave your whole world to, if you've ever cooked for people who never came home, then please like this video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Because maybe in my story, you'll find a little piece of your own. My daughter's name is Grace. She was my miracle baby, born when I was 40 and had given up hope of ever hearing someone call me Mom. I used to sing her to sleep every night, the same song my mother sang to me, a promise in every word: you'll never be alone. Her father passed when she was only 8. From that day on, it was just us, 2 people against the world. I worked long hours as a seamstress, stitching other people's happiness while mine sat unfinished at home. But every time Grace smiled, I believed it was worth it. She used to sit by my sewing table, swinging her legs and saying, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll take care of you." And I'd laugh, "Oh, sweetheart, I just want you to remember me." And for a long time, she did. She called every week after moving out, visited on weekends, and every Christmas, she'd walk through that door, her arms full of gifts and her eyes full of light. Those were the golden years, when love felt easy and home meant something. But time has a way of softening promises. The phone calls got shorter, the visits stopped, and I told myself it was normal. Children grow, mothers wait. That's the rule, isn't it? We raise them to leave and pray they remember the way back. The year she got married, she promised, Mom, next Christmas we'll celebrate together. I'll bring everyone home. I hung fairy lights on every window, cooked for 3 days, and waited like it was my purpose. But that call came instead. The one that said no room. That was the night I realized sometimes love doesn't leave you. It just forgets where you live. And maybe that's when my story really began. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in. One unanswered text, one postponed visit, one quiet apology at a time. That's the kind of silence I learned to live with. In the beginning, it was just space. Harmless, explainable space. Grace had just started her new job. She was newly married. Life was busy. I told myself, of course she's busy, Eleanor. That's what you raised her for. To live, to grow, to be happy. And I believed it. For a while. Her first missed visit came on Easter. She'd always brought flowers, tulips, her father's favorite, and I'd bake carrot cake. Hers. That year she texted, "Sorry, Mom, we're heading out of town. Rain check?" I smiled at the phone, typed back, "Of course, sweetheart. Have fun." And I meant it. I really did. But when I put the cake in the fridge, I stared at it for a long time. Because love can turn into leftovers faster than you expect. Then came the birthdays. First, a quick phone call. Then, just a message. Then, nothing. Each time, I'd still bake something, just in case she showed up anyway. She never did. I started talking to her photos more than I talked to her. There's one in particular, the two of us at the county fair when she was 12. Her face painted like a butterfly, mine glowing with sweat and pride. I used to dust that frame every morning, as if keeping it clean could keep the memory alive. Every holiday after that grew quieter. The table that once overflowed with food and laughter became a place for one. One plate, one cup, one heart, still waiting. I'd still cook too much. It's hard to unlearn 20 years of habit. I'd tell myself I'd freeze the leftovers. But most nights, they just went cold on the counter. Like promises nobody came back for. I tried to fill the silence. I joined the church choir for a bit. I attended knitting circles, tried to talk to neighbors. But every conversation seemed to end with, "Your daughter must be so proud of you." And I'd smile politely and say, "She's busy, but yes, she is." Because that lie felt easier than explaining the truth that my daughter had built a new life, and I wasn't in it. There was a night I'll never forget. Winter, 2 years before the Christmas call. I had decorated the house again, lights, candles, music, and I left the door unlocked, just in case she decided to come home after dinner with her in-laws. By midnight, I was still sitting there, hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. Outside, snow fell softly, that peaceful kind of snow that makes the world look kind when it isn't. I remember whispering, "I'm here, sweetheart, if you ever change your mind." No one answered, of course, but I kept saying it anyway, because waiting becomes its own language. You start hearing footsteps that aren't there. You start setting extra plates just to feel useful. You start imagining that maybe, just maybe, they'll surprise you this time. And when they don't, you learn how to live with the ache quietly, folding it between laundry and prayers, pretending it's just part of life. That's what I did. I became the mother who waited. Not because I loved being patient, but because I didn't know how to stop. Sometimes I'd dream she'd knock on the door again, that she'd walk in, drop her coat and say, "Mom, I missed you." And I'd wake up smiling, until I realized it was morning, and the only sound was the clock ticking on the kitchen wall. It's a strange thing, being forgotten by someone you can't forget. It doesn't happen like lightning. It happens like winter. Slow, quiet, and cold. Until one day you realize the warmth never came back. And still I waited, because mothers don't stop believing, even when their faith is the only thing left in the room.
Christmas Eve used to be my favorite night of the year. Not because of the lights or the food, but because it was the one night I was certain she'd come home. Every year, I made the same meal: honey ham, scalloped potatoes, apple pie. The same dishes, the same music, the same soft glow of candles reflecting off the window. Tradition was how I held on to her. If I kept everything the same, maybe she'd remember what home used to be. That year, I decorated the house early, hung her childhood stocking on the mantle, set her favorite red plate at the table. I even wrapped a small gift, a scarf I'd knitted in secret. Soft gray wool, warm, gentle, the kind of gift you make when you still believe someone might come back. I remember standing by the window, watching the snow fall outside, each flake melting against the glass like time refusing to stay still. And then the phone rang. My heart jumped. I smiled before I even answered. I could already picture her, rosy cheeks, bright eyes, maybe even a hint of apology in her voice. I pressed accept and said, breathless, "Hi, sweetheart, are you almost here?" There was a pause, the kind that doesn't feel like connection. It feels like distance. I heard laughter in the background, clinking glasses, chatter, music. Her voice came through, light but distracted. "Oh, Mom, hey, I just wanted to call before dinner." I laughed softly. "Good, I made all your favorites." "Oh, Mom, I meant to tell you earlier, but we didn't have room at the table this year. There's just too many of us. You understand, right?" At first, I thought I misheard her. Room? Did she mean space? Maybe they moved to a smaller dining room. Maybe. But then she kept talking, and every word chipped away another piece of me. It's just crazy this year. The kids, John's parents, his sister's family, the table's already packed. I swallowed, forcing the smile that had already broken. "Of course, darling, I understand." But I didn't. Not really. Because how do you understand being forgotten? "We'll plan something soon," she said, cheerful as ever. "Maybe next week?" Next week? As if mothers can be postponed. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yes, next week sounds lovely." "Okay, love you, Mom. Merry Christmas." The line clicked. Silence followed. The kind that doesn't hum, it screams. I stood there holding the phone, the glow of the screen reflecting in my tears. The candles flickered behind me, the food still steaming on the table. It wasn't just rejection, it was realization that somehow in the life she built, I had become an afterthought. I sat down slowly, staring at the chair where she used to sit, the one with the tiny scratch she made as a teenager when she accidentally spilled nail polish on it. I traced it with my finger and whispered, "You had a seat here long before you ever built your own table." The pie sat untouched. The ham went cold. The lights twinkled in defiance of the heaviness in my chest. And somewhere outside, fireworks went off in the distance, the sound of celebration echoing through the night that had forgotten me. I wanted to cry, but even tears refused to come. Grief has a way of freezing before it falls. So I just sat there, at a table full of food, and no one to feed, listening to the house breathe around me, listening to the kind of silence that only comes when love doesn't leave. It just forgets to come home. The clock struck 7, and for the first time in 30 years, Christmas dinner began and ended in silence. The candles burned low, casting small golden halos on the plates I'd set hours earlier. Each plate was a memory. Grace's laughter, her father's jokes, the way we used to sing carols out of tune. Now, all that remained were shadows on porcelain. I sat at the head of the table, hands folded, staring at the empty chairs. The food still steamed, the ham glistened under the light, the apple pie smelled like home, but there was no one to pass the plates to. No one to say grace. Just me. The radio in the corner played faintly. Have yourself a merry little Christmas. The irony almost made me laugh, but even laughter felt too heavy to lift. I tried to eat, just to make the night feel normal, but every bite tasted like waiting. So I put the fork down and whispered, "Maybe next year." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, relentless, as if the sky itself was mourning with me. I looked toward the window, and for a moment I saw our reflection in the glass, the ghost of every Christmas we ever had. Grace at 12, cutting paper snowflakes and sticking them to the window with tape. Her father holding her up to place the star on the tree. Me, smiling from across the room, believing those moments would last forever. But forever, I've learned, is a word only love believes in. Time believes in endings. At some point, the candles flickered out. The room fell into darkness, except for the faint orange glow from the fireplace. I pulled my shawl tighter, not because I was cold, but because I needed to feel held, even if it was just by fabric. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't make noise. It sits beside you, breathing in rhythm with your heartbreak. It doesn't ask questions or offer comfort. It just stays. Hours passed. I don't know when I started talking aloud. Maybe to her, maybe to myself. Do you remember, Grace? The year you spilled cocoa on the rug? You cried for an hour. Do you remember when your father danced with you in the kitchen while I cooked? Do you remember me? The room didn't answer. It never does. Around midnight, I gathered the plates, one by one, carrying them to the sink. The sound of porcelain clinking felt too loud, like breaking something sacred. I covered the leftover food, tucked the pie in the fridge, and turned off the lights. But the house didn't feel dark. It felt empty. Before going to bed, I stopped by the door and looked back at the table. The candle wicks were still smoking faintly, thin trails rising into the air like prayers too shy to leave. And I thought about what she'd said on the phone. We didn't have room at the table this year. The words echoed like a hymn turned cruel. I whispered to the dark, "That's all right, sweetheart. I have a whole table to myself." Then I climbed the stairs slowly,
each step creaking beneath the weight of everything I didn't say. Upstairs, I paused at her old room. The door was half open, the moonlight spilling across her childhood bed, the one covered in a quilt I made when she was 8. I sat at the edge of it, touched the pillow, and closed my eyes. That night, I didn't dream of her coming home. I dreamed of building a new table, one no one could ever take away from me again. When I woke up, the house was still silent, but something inside me had changed. The waiting was over, and in its place, a strange, quiet kind of strength began to rise.
The next morning, the light was different. Not softer, not brighter. Just honest. It poured through the kitchen window, spilling across the table like forgiveness. The candles were burned down to wax puddles. The plates were still stacked neatly beside the sink. Everything looked the same as it had the night before. And yet, I wasn't. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the same table that had broken me. The same table where the words, "no room," had echoed in my chest all night. But as the steam rose from my cup, I felt something rise with it, a quiet defiance. For so long, I had lived like a guest in my own life, waiting for phone calls, for visits, for approval, waiting to be chosen. But what if I stopped waiting? What if I built something of my own, not out of need, but out of love that refused to die? That thought sat with me for a while, as if it too needed a seat at the table. I looked out the window at the old shed by the maple tree. It had been years since I'd gone inside. My late husband, Thomas, used to build furniture there. He loved the smell of sawdust and the way wood could be shaped into anything. Tables, chairs, memories. When he died, I locked the shed and never opened it again. But now I wondered, maybe that was where my healing had been waiting all along. I slipped on my boots and walked outside. The snow crunched underfoot, crisp and unyielding. When I opened the shed door, a wave of scent hit me. Aged timber, dust, and something bittersweet, like the past refusing to fade. His old tools still hung on the wall. The workbench was covered in cobwebs and forgotten projects. And there, under a tarp, was a piece of unfinished wood. Flat, wide, strong. A table that never got the chance to become one. I stood there for a long time, my hand brushing over the wood, and whispered, "Maybe it's time we finish this, Tom." The idea took hold like a heartbeat. I didn't need a new memory. I needed a new purpose. So I began. The first nail I hammered in sounded like thunder in the quiet. It startled me, and then it comforted me. Each swing of the hammer was a release. Each scrape of sandpaper was a prayer. I wasn't just building a table. I was rebuilding myself. Days turned into weeks. I worked through the mornings, through the ache in my arms and the calluses on my palms. Sometimes I talked to Thomas while I worked. Sometimes I just listened to the rhythm of creation. Steady, healing, alive. Neighbors would pass by and ask what I was making. I'd smile and say, "A new kind of table." They'd nod politely, not understanding that it wasn't just wood I was shaping. It was forgiveness. By the time spring arrived, the table was finished. Simple, sturdy, beautiful in its imperfections. 8 chairs surround it, not for the family who left, but for the ones life might bring. I polished it with care, placed a vase of wildflowers in the center, and stood back. For the first time in years, I felt proud of something I'd made, something that didn't depend on anyone's presence but my own. That night, I lit one candle and sat at my new table. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt open. I didn't know who would sit there in the days to come. Strangers, maybe? Neighbors. Souls who needed warmth the way I once did. But one thing was certain. This table would never be a place of waiting again. It would be a place of welcome. And as I looked at the glow of the candle dancing across the wood, I whispered to the empty room, "You didn't leave me without love, Grace. You just left me room to find it again."
It started quietly, not as a grand plan, not as a statement of strength, but as a whisper in my heart. If she had no room for me at her table, then I'll make one where no one feels left out again. The first Sunday after finishing the table, I baked bread. The smell filled the house, warm and alive, a scent that felt like forgiveness rising. I made soup, too. Just one pot, enough for 2 or 3 people, or so I thought. But then I remembered the widowed man down the road, the college boy who walked past my fence every day with the same torn jacket, and Mrs. Callahan, sweet, quiet Mrs. Callahan, who'd lost her husband the same winter I lost Thomas. So I made more. At first it was awkward. How do you invite strangers to a table built from heartbreak? But something in my voice must have carried truth, because they came, one by one. That first night, there were 5 of us. 5 people with nowhere to be, finding warmth in a house that had forgotten the sound of laughter. I poured soup into mismatched bowls, and as we ate, stories began to spill. Stories of loss, of love, of survival. No one asked me why I'd done it. Maybe they already knew. By the second Sunday, there were 8 of us, then 12, and soon every chair at my new table was full. We weren't family, not by blood, not by name, but we became something gentler, a quiet refuge, a reminder that sometimes love returns, just in a different shape. The room began to breathe again. Laughter, soft at first, then louder, filled corners that had known only echoes. I'd watch them, these souls who'd once dined alone, passing plates, clinking spoons, smiling, and I'd think, Grace, this is what you taught me, to never let anyone else feel like they don't belong. One evening, as the sun set behind the frosted windows, I caught myself looking at the empty chair at the end of the table, the one I never let anyone take, her chair. And for the first time, it didn't hurt. It just reminded me. Because grief doesn't disappear. It transforms. It becomes purpose. People started calling it Eleanor's Sundays. They'd bring flowers, desserts, sometimes just stories. And every week I'd light one candle in the center of the table for the ones who were still lost, still waiting for a seat somewhere. The funny thing about love is, the more you give it away, the more it finds its way back to you. A few months later, a local paper wrote a small piece about us. The widow who built a table for everyone. I smiled when I saw the title. If only they knew. It wasn't widowhood that built this table. It was being a mother who refused to stay broken. One evening, after everyone left, I sat there alone again, but it wasn't the same kind of alone. It was full of laughter, of memories, of warmth that lingered in the air. I ran my hand along the smooth wooden surface, the grain, the polish, the life that pulsed beneath it, and whispered, "Do you see this, Grace?
You left me no room, so I made one for the world. The house didn't echo anymore. It hummed, softly, peacefully, like forgiveness had finally found a home.
It had been nearly a year since that call, the one that hollowed Christmas into a quiet ache. Since then, the seasons had shifted like chapters, each one leaving behind its own kind of healing. Spring had come, and the house was no longer lonely. The table I'd built gleamed under the morning light, its surface polished by laughter, by hands that had held stories instead of sorrow. That Sunday started like any other. I was slicing bread, humming softly to the radio, when I heard it. A knock on the door. It was gentle, almost hesitant, like someone unsure if they were still welcome. I wiped my hands, walked to the door, and when I opened it, the world stood still. Grace. My daughter. The same brown eyes I once kissed goodnight, now dimmed with something I hadn't seen before. Regret. She stood there on the porch, a small bouquet of daisies in her hands, the kind she used to pick for me as a little girl. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "Hi, Mom." For a moment, I couldn't speak. It was as if every word I'd swallowed over the last year was trying to surface at once. "Hi, sweetheart," I finally said. "It's been a while." She nodded, eyes glistening. I didn't know if I should come." "You just did," I said softly. We stood there, two women separated by choices and time, and for the first time, she looked small again. Not in size, but in spirit. She handed me the flowers. "They're for you. I didn't know what else to bring." I smiled faintly. Daisies are perfect. Inside, the table was set. Not for her, not for me, but for the Sunday dinner I'd prepared for my little circle of guests. Through the window, she saw them. People chatting, laughing, passing plates. Her brows furrowed. "Mom? Who are they?" "Friends," I said simply. "People who had nowhere to sit." Her eyes flickered. First confusion, then something softer. Something like shame. "You do this every week?" "Every week," I nodded. "We share food, stories, and kindness. That's all." She looked at the table again, and I could tell the irony wasn't lost on her. The same woman she once told had no place had built one for others who'd been left out. I motioned her inside. "You're welcome to join if you'd like." She hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know if she deserved to. Her voice cracked. "I don't know if I belong here anymore." I took her hand gently. "Grace, you've always had a seat. You just forgot where it was." The noise from the table grew louder. Laughter, clinking glasses, the sound of life happening. And as she looked toward the group, tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "She thought you'd hate me," she whispered. "I did," I said honestly, "for a little while." I paused, squeezing her hand. "But hate doesn't build tables. Love does." Her face crumpled, and before I could say another word, she stepped forward and hugged me. Not the kind of hug that says hello, but the kind that says, "I remember who you are." For the first time in a year, my house felt whole again. Not because she came home, but because forgiveness did. When we finally sat down, she looked around the table, at the faces of strangers, now turned family, and she whispered, "You built this? All on your own?" I smiled. "No, love built it. I just gave it a place to sit." The candles flickered, the laughter grew, and Grace reached across the table for my hand. It was warm, human, home. Dinner had ended, but no one wanted to leave. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with a kind of peace that words couldn't reach. Plates were empty, laughter lingered in the air.
Yet at the far end of the table, Grace sat quietly, her untouched cup of tea trembling between her hands. She looked different now, not just older, but humbled. Her polished edges had softened, her voice quieter, her eyes heavy with something more than exhaustion. It was guilt. Years of it. I could feel it from across the table. As the others began to gather their coats and say goodnight, she stayed seated, staring down at her reflection in the tea. When the finally closed behind the last guest, the house fell silent again. But it wasn't the same kind of silence. This one felt full, waiting for something to be said. "You made all this," Grace whispered, "and I didn't even know." I smiled faintly. "There's a lot you didn't know, sweetheart, but you're here now." She blinked rapidly, then looked up, her lip quivering. "Mom, I don't deserve to be here. Why would you say that?" Her voice broke. "Because I left you alone. Because I chose convenience over love. Because I was selfish and stupid, and I thought you'd always wait." The words tumbled out of her. Years of shame, of regret, of things too heavy to say until now. Tears streaked her cheeks as she gripped the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. She said, "I thought growing up meant building my own life, but somehow I built one without you in it. And when you stopped calling, I thought you finally stopped needing me." I reached across the table, taking her hand, warm, shaking, the same hand I used to hold when she crossed the street. "Oh, Grace," I said softly, "I never stopped needing you. I just stopped waiting for you to need me back." She cried harder then, the kind of crying that shakes the body, that empties every quiet corner of a heart. I didn't rush to comfort her. I just sat there, holding her hand, letting her grief catch up to her love. When she could finally speak again, she whispered, "I didn't know it hurt you that much." "Of course you didn't," I said gently. "You were busy living, and I wanted that for you." She wiped her eyes, her voice barely a breath. "But I should have made room." That's when I said it. The words that had lived inside me for a year. The truth that had carried me through every lonely night and every candlelit Sunday. I said, "Money can buy comfort, sweetheart, but it can't buy home." The room went still. Even the fire seemed to quiet, listening. She looked at me, and in that moment, I saw the little girl she used to be. The one who used to crawl into my lap after a bad dream. The one who used to whisper, "Don't let go, Mommy." Grace reached across the table, her tears falling onto the wood I had built with my own hands. She whispered, "I'm so sorry." I said, "I know. That's why I built something that would never close its doors." She smiled through tears, her voice shaking as she said, "You turned pain into kindness. I don't know how." I looked down at the table that had seen loneliness, love, and everything in between. "Because, my love," I said, "when someone tells you there's no room for you, the trick isn't to leave, it's to make more room." Grace covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. Then she stood, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around me. "I missed you, Mom. Welcome home, sweetheart." And just like that, the ache that had lived in me for so long finally exhaled.
Morning arrived quietly, the kind of gentle dawn that feels like the world's way of saying, "It's okay now." The snow outside had softened overnight, and sunlight spilled through the kitchen window in long, forgiving rays. For the first time in a long time, the house wasn't heavy. It breathed. It felt alive again. Downstairs, the smell of tea drifted through the air. Grace was already awake. I could hear her moving around the kitchen, the same soft clinking of cups I used to wake up to when she was little and playing pretend. When I walked in, she smiled, the kind of small, tired smile that still manages to carry love. "Morning, Mom," she said softly. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied. 2 simple words, but they carried a weight neither of us needed to name. We sat at the table together, the table I built from the pieces of my pain, and for the first time, it felt whole. She poured the tea, hands trembling just slightly, and whispered, "You really built this, didn't you?" I nodded. Every nail, every chair, every scar in the wood. Her fingers traced the table surface, pausing where the grain curved unevenly. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's imperfect," I corrected. "That's what makes it real." She looked at me then, really looked, and I think she saw the woman she'd forgotten, not just her mother, but the person who had survived every season without her. She said, "I wish I could undo it. The things I said, the way I made you feel." I smiled gently. "Undoing isn't love, Grace. Forgiving is." She blinked back tears. "How did you forgive me so easily?" I took a slow breath, watching the sunlight catch in the steam between us. Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about remembering without losing your peace. For a while, neither of us spoke. The house creaked softly, the clock ticked, and outside, the snow melted in quiet surrender. She whispered finally, "I didn't deserve your love." "No," I said, smiling. "But that's what makes it love." Her hand found mine across the table, and for the first time, it wasn't the grip of a child needing comfort. It was one woman holding another, grateful for what was left. I looked around the kitchen, the faded curtains, the chipped mug Thomas used to drink from, the light dancing on the walls, and I realized something simple. This was home, not because of who filled it, but because of what it had taught me. Love isn't about staying, it's about returning. And sometimes the ones who leave don't come back right away, but when they do, you recognize them not by their words, but the quiet in their eyes. Grace finished her tea and stood, moving to the window where the snow glowed gold under the morning sun. She turned back to me, her voice steady for the first time in years. "Mom, thank you for waiting." I smiled. "I didn't wait, honey. I lived, and you found your way back." She nodded slowly, tears glistening again, but this time they weren't heavy. They were cleansing. When she left that afternoon, she hugged me longer than she ever had before. The door closed softly behind her, and for a moment I stood in the sunlight, letting the warmth touch every part of me that had once gone cold. Later, I sat down at the table again, the same table that started as heartbreak and ended as healing. I lit one candle, not for her, not for me, but for us. Because love, I've learned, doesn't end when it's forgotten. It waits, quietly, patiently, faithfully, until the heart remembers how to come home. And as the candle flame flickered, I whispered to the empty chair across from me, not out of sadness, but gratitude. "There's always room at my table, Grace. Even if you forget, I'll keep the light on."